Hello and welcome to my action potential video. So we start at our presynaptic neuron, releasing a neurotransmitter from the terminal end, and the receptors on our postsynaptic neuron, the neurotransmitter binds to it, and that will open some ligand gated channels, which then opens sodium channels, and because our neuron is more negative inside than it is outside, the sodium entering in is going to change our membrane potential, which at resting membrane potential is -70 millivolts. So with our sodium coming in, that's going to depolarize our neuron and bring this closer, less different from our threshold, which is -55 millivolts. So that sodium kind of coming in is going to change this to maybe -69 or -68 or so on. So that's gonna depolarize the membrane potential. So that neurotransmitter opening up those sodium channels is what we call a graded response. So the more neurotransmitter we have binding to those receptors, is the more channels are going to open, the more sodium channels that are going to open. So the more that we get is just the more channels that are going to, ligand gated channels that are going to start to open, which is different from our all or nothing response, which I will get to. So we do have a little bit of a couple other ions here. We have chloride, which is an inhibitory ion, and that can also change the membrane permeability and like how integration would work, because integration is the summing up of all of our like what's going on in the neuron, and like all the stimuli that are coming in. So having this negative ion chloride and the positive ion sodium, if there's more receptors being activated from the inhibitory stimuli, then this would go, instead of going this way, getting closer to the threshold at -55, this would go this way instead, and it would go to -71 or -72 or 73, whatever that was. So that would be an inhibitory stimuli, and that's just a little bit different. So moving on. So threshold, as I was saying before, is -55 millivolts, and once threshold is reached, it'll open up voltage gated channels down the axon, and the action potential would then be propagated. So how that works is, like, threshold will get reached here at the axon hillock, and those sodium channels will open, and then potassium channels open, and you'll have your threshold reached here, and then that will initiate voltage gated channels, which will open up sodium channels over here and potassium channels over here, which will then cause threshold to be reached over here, and so on and so forth. And then that's how the action potential gets propagated down the axon. So discussing this drawing a little bit, we have resting membrane potential at -70, and then you get some type of stimulus. So you get a stimulus, and then that'll be sorted out in integration if it will reach threshold. So threshold, getting to that -55 threshold is an all or nothing response, which means that you can't have like your voltage at like -54 or -53. That's not gonna initiate your action potential. That's, it has to be -55 or nothing. It's got to get to that -55 or it's not going to happen. So we get our stimulus. Once we reach threshold, all of the sodium channels open, and that's when we start to depolarize. And that'll be the sodium channels opening, and then we shoot up to +30 voltage, and that's when our potassium channels open. So the potassium channels open a lot slower than the sodium channels, and with the potassium ion, positively charged potassium ion leaving the cell, we start to get some repolarization, because now we're making our neuron like more negative again, because we have a positive ion leaving the neuron. So right here, this will be phase 2. We have repolarization, and with those gates closing so slow, the the sodium gates are going to close first, and the potassium gates are still going to be open. So we'll get some hyperpolarization, which is the voltage going above -70. So it'll get to, maybe -80 or so voltage, and then that potassium sodium pump that I didn't draw on here, but there's always a potassium and sodium pump, changing the potassium and the sodium in and out, trying to keep things balanced so that it stays more negative inside and more positive outside. So once you get right here to the hyperpolarization, that sodium potassium pump is going to kind of take care of that and bring things back to resting membrane potential. So with that action potential going all the way down that axon, it's going to come all the way down here and cause some voltage gated channels to open at the synaptic, I don't know why I can't say that, the end bulb down here, which would cause calcium to be released, and that causes fusion of the vesicles with the plasma membrane, and then that would release whatever neurotransmitters in there to come out in here, and then it would start all over again. So the neurotransmitter comes out to the dendrites and starts all over again.